Welcome to the DevReady Podcast, where we're helping non-techs build better tech. Today, we're fortunate enough to be joined by Su Jella. She is one of Australia's top 25 analytics leaders, recognised by the Institute of Analytics Professionals of Australia. Really excited to have her on today to talk about how, in an organisation, we may use data better. Sue, thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much, Andrew. Such a pleasure to meet with you and be able to share some of my learnings and experiences. Appreciate your time. I guess just a bit of introduction to myself. Absolutely passionate about data. And I love telling the story of how data could be useful and managed better within an organization and some of the best practices that can help us really grab value from that. In terms of my background, so I'm actually marketing by trade. I'm a marketing person by trade. And a big taste of data came to me when I started delivering a lot of market research projects. And as we know, if we look at historical timelines, market research was basically the mother of data insights and understanding your customer, how to engage with your customer, how to entice your customer in a way as well. And that really was a very interesting area for me. There was a lot of statistical analysis, quite a bit of consumer behavior, psychological behaviors that lead people and customers to take the actions that they do. And as we all know, we all are customers in some shape or form. So it's always good to dig into the psychology of people and see what's the best way in which we could either service their needs or enhance their needs. So a lot of data went into some of the work that I did earlier in my career, and I was fortunate enough to then step into more of a digital marketing role where I did a lot of work around metadata, keyword searches, optimizing websites, optimizing content on websites, and then analyzing that data and how users navigate through the website, their behaviors, the actions that they take. So it was very much in the early days of digital marketing where it was more important to have a presence and a site than to be competitive. And obviously that led to more competitive websites and more competitive learnings in websites, as well as digital engagement, which then translated into app engagement and our digital assets in general. From there, I ended up marrying up the worlds of web technologies with CRM technologies and databases, and really starting to build out the value of our data between a database-based environment as well as a digital environment like a website or an app. And that opened up a whole other world of data manipulation and understanding and blending of data sets, and then taking that back to different teams to tell a story about the customer on how to optimize your advertising, or perhaps maybe even how to optimize your website just to get better quality leads or better quality data. And then that evolved into more enterprise level analytics roles, and I started doing a lot more data analysis and insights in different teams and different areas, and making that more accessible for organizations, be it either through a dashboard or a report or just through conversation and telling that story. And so, that's been my journey. And from there, it's obviously taken on more leadership opportunities and being able to support, drive teams, and blend in the leadership ability, not just the data capability, but the leadership around data, and enhancing the profile of data specialists and knowing what skills we need versus what strategies we need to drive in order to optimize the use of data. And that's where I've been.
Yeah, there's a lot of background, a lot of information. Thanks for sharing all the detail behind it. Data analytics, what does that actually mean? Let's lift the lid on that. What are you doing as a day-to-day, someone in that space with all this data flowing around a customer, around maybe how the organization's operating, around a CRM, around a website, bringing it all together? What's the day in the life of a data analytics person look like? Just lift the lid off that a little bit for people out there.
That is a really long question. It's not a tough question. It's a long question. How much time do we have again?
We have plenty of time.
I'd say it could be anything from really analyzing data, cleaning up data, preparing data, to actually talking to somebody about their data problem. So, there's a vast difference between a conversation and being
Mm-hmm.
able to code and manipulate tables and databases and data sources. So, as a data analyst or someone who's working with data, at least in that hybrid conduit role, it can be
Mm-hmm.
anything in that continuum. So for me, I started off, looking at a lot of different data sets, and a lot of my
Yes.
time was actually spent cleaning data, and then
Okay.
understanding, how can I make this data more valuable? What does
Yeah.
100% of data value mean versus the data we actually have? And by that I mean, we could end up with a million rows of data, but actually only 20 or 30% is really valuable.
Okay.
So I started off a lot of my data analysis doing that sort of assessment around the value of
Mm-hmm.
data. What really is the story I can tell my audience? What is going to actually derive action or deliver action? And how can I do that? That was what I started off earlier in my career. But then the lens of having that marketing research background really added a lot more value, because it meant I was giving a recommendation. I was giving a suggestion, and I was telling my audience or my stakeholder, this is what we need to do, because based on evidence and based on fact, this is what I've actually achieved from churning through this data. So, on a day to day level, I'd say in current state, a lot of it is still very much the same. The techniques have changed, the methodologies have changed, our technology has become a lot more sophisticated. A fair amount of it has become much bigger than it was 10 years or 15 years ago. But the prominent and dominating, I would say, the dominating concept is that the foundations are still very much the same. And the problems we're trying to solve in terms of how can I make sure I'm using this data in a way that's actually useful and that'll make a difference to the work that I'm doing today versus 12 months' time is the problem I guess most organizations want to solve. And that's what we do on a day to day basis. Understand the requirements, what is really the objective you're trying to achieve, and do I have the data to support this? And if I don't, what can I do to ensure that I have the right data to help provide this value to you? And also just being honest about it. If we don't have the data, we don't. And if we don't have data that we can trust, at least it's an opportunity to build on the trust factor of that data.
And to improve, right? So I think,
Correct.
yeah,
Absolutely.
opening gaps, problems is important in any organization. We need to really know where we stand and how to move forward. Data is one thing, but I think you mentioned it just then, is how do we collect good data that's actually going to really benefit an organization? What are some tips you can look at around that specific area for a business that's on their data journey, trying to bring things together? Where do they start if they're going to be really digging in on data, not just from a marketing lens, but a holistic view of a business? How might they begin a process like this?
I'd say the first process is it's two parts. One is, do you have the data at all? Do you have any data as an organization? Are you starting from scratch? Or do you actually have data that you could use, but need to optimize it? So that's probably the first two approaches. I can't imagine that there's any organization that doesn't have any data.
Yeah, there's always some data. It's just, is it
Exactly.
useful, is it not? So are we
Exactly.
collecting the right things or just collecting data for data's sake?
Yeah, correct, exactly. And then, of course, once you start having those conversations with different stakeholders, you'll understand how is the data managed within their teams, how is the data being processed and then delivered to the end customer in that pipeline, in that actual journey. I mean, when I look at customer experience, for instance, we have great user journeys mapped out, but we don't have sufficient data points that plug into those journeys to tell that story and validate that story. So that's one example where you would start your data journey or start the understanding of how do I collect and store this data. Maybe start with your customer data. What is those journeys? What are those journeys? And how do they map themselves out? And what has been done to actually understand where customers are playing in that field of that pipeline? Um, in terms of the actual collection, it would depend completely on what resources you have. What are the tools that you have? How have you been collecting data? Is it very manual? Is it predominantly through a newsletter, through your website? What's the channel of communication? What's the channel of data collection? That's the first starting point. I think when we think tools, and a lot of times when we think technology, we always think about the storage piece, but we forget about how does this data actually enter our system and live in there. So that's the starting point of how do we generally collect data. And it doesn't matter, it could even be manual, but it's a point of collection, it's a channel. And to understand that channel and also store that channel of information in your database is really important. If I give an example around data collection, if we find that a lot of data is manually collected, that's an opportunity to optimize and build some automation techniques in that, where we free up time from staff around data collection and human error, and we focus on actually analyzing that data. So, what is this data now telling me? Because I actually have time to look at the data and derive insights from that. If I go back to early in my career, I actually did a lot of data entry, and it was a great learning opportunity. When I did market research and data collection, a lot of the insights and responses that I received from customers were manually put into a database because there was no other interface like an iPad or a phone where we could actually collect that data in a more seamless experience. And that
Mm.
alone was a great experience because it really put my analysis in context of how the data was collected and how it was churned and analyzed and modeled. So I've been through that entire journey. Of course, now we don't really have to use those techniques, but believe it or not, a lot of organizations still use
I think
manual data collection.
many do. Yes, I don't. Yeah, and the doesn't mean big, small, or indifferent. A lot are still manually collecting data, if not missing a lot of data points that they're not collecting as well, because they're not looking at these processes nor considering them. I think the bigger the business gets, the more data analytics you may have. But
Yeah,
like you said, a phone call can be recorded and analysed in the background these
exactly.
days for put data points into a database. It doesn't necessarily have to be entry points on a screen into a CRM or something along those lines. So there's a lot of opportunity for process improvement here too.
Exactly. And I think once you start looking at the different fields and parameters and variables that are making that record a complete record, or your data points or your journey a complete journey, that's when you start realizing I need to store this in a particular way. I need to also protect this data in a particular way. And what's the best way to start utilizing it and sharing it across my peers or my organization? So you could really start from a really small basis, a small cohort, and build it out into something much bigger. So again, it just depends where you are in that journey. And like we said earlier on, I'm sure there's any organization would have data. It just depends on the complexity and the volume of it.
You mentioned marketing at the beginning and where you started. Is that generally where a lot of organizations spend time with data? Marketing sales, is that where a lot of the emphasis goes because it's a revenue driver?
I would say yes. I think there's interest in a lot of organizations from a digital perspective. So I think it's evolved to become more of a digital priority as well to look at the data. But you're absolutely right. The commercial returns of data is where a lot of efforts go into sales, marketing, sponsorships as well. Like banks, they tend to spend a lot of time around sponsorships and understanding the value of that sponsorship and whether they should be continuing on that journey or not. And then, of course, there's other teams where it's more important to understand the management of that data because of breaches. And as we know, a lot of that has happened in the last few years. But from a cybersecurity perspective, data is really valuable from that avenue as well, because we're all storing customer data. So outside of the commercial returns, there's a huge interest in how data is being managed across different areas of business. And like I mentioned, it's the likes of cybersecurity and potentially sponsorships that may not necessarily have direct returns, but returns in some indirect way. And then, of course, there's also your HR analytics, people analytics, where it's about people, again, that join the organization, work in an organization, and that becomes a big priority for them. So, yes, I would say 60% is definitely a commercial interest, but then 40%, which is also a significant chunk, is spread across the business in different ways.
How are people at the end of the road looking to consume data? Is it a lot of BI tools happening in organizations? What's generally happening in terms of visualization? Where does it get to? Because in the end, we need to make decisions, and generally, the people that are making decisions on the data don't know how to analyze and look at the data. So, getting it in front of them in the correct manner is probably one of the biggest challenges, I would think.
Definitely. Interestingly enough, I think a lot of organizations are still pretty comfortable using Excel spreadsheets to
Yeah,
visualize
it's
things.
a crazy world. Yeah, we see it all the time. It's like you shake your head, but the reality is a lot are still crunching, churning, pivoting tables, and producing some sort of output out of the Excel spreadsheet. You're right.
Yeah, and I think
Mm.
it's got a lot to do with comfort as well, because the moment you start entering more technical worlds, it means you need a specific technical skill set. Whereas, the beauty of a spreadsheet is that it's quite accessible and usable by, many people. I wouldn't say everyone has the knack of using it, but most people do. Most people know how to use your basic office tools. So, from that respect, I would say common visualization is through a spreadsheet, and then it goes into PowerPoint, where instead of actually automating the data feed from a spreadsheet, it's building out your own visuals to tell a story and to tell that particular journey of data or a customer or of the organization. And then, of course, it's your general visualization tools. I would say in the last 12 to 24 months, visualization tools have become a lot more sophisticated, more intuitive, and easier to handle and manipulate.
Any
Um,
reason why that is in your mind?
I would say there's a few factors. One is definitely AI, and then
Yep.
from AI, Gen
Hmm.
AI becoming
Yes.
the key
Everyone
call
thinks
out.
AI. Most people think AI is just Gen AI, but that's okay. Um,
I know it's
mm,
it's it's interesting who you speak to about that. Like
yes.
I am not completely,
Mm,
completely surprised by Gen AI, because
yeah.
the reality is I've actually been doing AI for 10 years,
Yeah.
but
Okay.
it's not realized because it's the
Yes.
AI I've been doing on the back end
Hmm.
rather than the AI I've been doing that people can access.
Of
It's the
course.
intuitive AI that maybe is
Hmm.
more, it's more accessible now, and there's obviously a lot more
It's yes, in
noise.
front of a lot more people, right? So the
Exactly.
type of AI you would be doing would be building models around particular data sets and then looking for actual trends in data, and then
Yeah.
the models are doing this for on behalf. Explain it a little bit to people what the difference is between Gen AI and big data analysis. Give people a bit of a context there.
I would say that's going to be very
Yes,
controversial because it's purely my opinion. It doesn't
that's
have to
okay.
be a Google or a ChatGPT opinion. It's my opinion.
Yes,
I think Gen AI is an intuitive conversational based AI, very much like a chatbot that synthesizes a lot of information in a few seconds, and makes it a lot easier to build content, images, or anything for that matter that would take several hours. So to me, it is very much a supervised model, a supervised learning model. It needs to be fed and trained to be able to deliver an outcome and deliver insight or data. Whereas if we look at big data, there's actually a lot of manipulation. You can look at big data from the context of unsupervised and supervised learning. And before you even get to Gen AI, the mother of Gen AI is actually natural language processing. I don't think a lot of people know that, because topic modeling and understanding text and unstructured data has actually been around for a number of
a
years,
long time.
a
Yes.
very long time. It's sort of
Mm.
like almost, a huge part of data science, and being able to manage data that's not structured. And so anything that's unstructured has generally fallen into the natural language processing space. So anyway, I digress. Big data is really looking at the volume of data you have in your systems and synthesizing that into a contextual reference that can be understood and absorbed by an organization. But the caveat to that is that it's not necessarily accessible. It's not necessarily typing in a question and getting the answer as quickly as you would through ChatGPT or OpenAI for that matter. You actually have to go in, manipulate data sets, understand what the requirements are, and build algorithms, test and learn, and then be able to deploy that into a usable format that can then be used by a wider audience. I know I've really synthesized that. There's obviously a lot more work that goes on in the back end, but I guess for the purposes of those who are willing to learn right at the ground level, there is a stark difference between ChatGPT and what we're doing with Gen AI versus what big data is in its holistic sense. And it goes back to what I was saying earlier on about marketing research and how we derived insights through marketing research. It is very much a form of big data because you're looking at total populations of millions and billions and synthesizing that into sample data that could make sense in your context, not necessarily representative, but definitely making sense in your context.
And that becomes, yeah, like you said, ChatGPT, OpenAI, that particular world is a conversation. In the other space, you're looking for correlations in data and things that are actually impacting. In simple terms, are if X and Y are happening, likelihood Z is going to be happening, or the percentage of that. So it's a very different space completely in terms of what, they particularly are. So in the world of, you're working in the world of big data, really. That's
Yeah.
the take here. So there's been, and you just said there's been a change because of the world of OpenAI and what's going on. These particular tools that you're able to access, what benefits are you seeing in terms of that sort of space? So what's the advantage of now, as we're having generative AI, what's that doing to the world of big data?
It's definitely given a lot more popularity to data. I wouldn't say
Mm-hmm.
necessarily big data, but data in
Yes.
general and
Mm-hmm.
technology in general. I think the misunderstanding, though, is that AI is technology. Yes, it is technology, but it's predominantly data. So data has existed in the form of numbers and information for eons. Technology is a more recent capability, and it's the way we collect and store data. So I think it's the misconception around AI and technology being one and the same thing. It's not. And we need both. We need technology, you need data, but AI is an outcome of that. AI helps to make life easier in some contexts. It reduces time. That's the whole perception of AI. It's time reducing. It's helping you become more efficient. It's helping you become more available to spend time doing productive activities. But again, I think we need to step back and also understand that we still need to humanize that experience. Just because we have AI, it doesn't mean we forget about the human aspect of that. Humanizing that experience and ensuring that we're still keeping people at the forefront of our processes, of our objectives, is the primary capability we should not forget. I hope I answered the question, by the way.
No, that makes sense. I was just thinking on a bit of a tangent. The data that we've created over the last 20, 30 years as a result of what we're doing, technology means that we need something to help us synthesize it, which is where AI is actually getting us to. So it's fascinating. So that's solving a problem of the amount of data that we're just producing over the years, and that's cascading and evolving over time. Now AI is producing more data, i.e. Gen, in terms of
Yeah.
content on websites everywhere. So we're creating a bit of a snowball effect, which is a fun sort of place to be right now. In the terms of your business, where do you see the most value with data really in terms of organizations? What's the key things and the insights that you've seen across your time where organizations should invest? Is it the marketing? Is it operations? What's some of the key takes or wins that you've had in your experience that you say, okay, well, that was a great use of big data and a really good outcome that we achieved?
One of the experiences I can talk about where I've seen a really good output of data is the use of data from a social responsibility context, so data for
Okay.
social good.
Hmm. Yes.
And there's been some incredible outcomes through that. And I know we always focus on data from a revenue generating perspective and from a perspective where we're acquiring more customers, we have more leads, and we go through that entire sales funnel. But it's not really about that alone. We can actually make a lot of good use of our data with the social responsibility aspect attached to it. So one of the use cases I can talk about is building out products, services, as well as features in digital tools through customer feedback. And now customer
Interesting.
feedback in its sense is very much, a broad overarching view of what the customer says to us. But if you actually really listen to what the customer says, you can build brilliant products. So I was working on a project that was very much an NLP, natural language processing project, and built rows and items and records of data, and that was in from 50 to 100,000 a day. And so at the end of it, we were looking at almost like 1 million records of data in potentially a month to 2 months. But that's
Yeah,
all
wow.
customer feedback. So it's all purely
That's customer feedback. Oh, it's big,
exactly
really big data sets. Yeah, huge.
very, very big data sets. But by automating, first of all, that entire process, so that's end to end from the point of collection to the point of protection, manipulation, functional algorithms to churn through the data, categorize that data, model the data into different topics, and then be able to give you a value of that data, as in, this is what your customers scored you on average on a particular day in a particular month. So really being able to go into granular detail on scoring. And then, second to that, more importantly, looking at the categories of feedback that you've received. So, what are the different themes and praises, compliments, problems, challenges that customers are talking about so that you can improve the experience? So, that's information that we received from various channels, and it was not subjected to one channel. Um, Being able to build all those data sources into one centralized database, and then being able to come back with 3 key points. What are the pain points? What are the compliments? And what is our score? And how are we going to use this now to build out features for our product? That's where I saw real value for it. And the reason why it was social good is because it wasn't monetized. None of the data was monetized, and the access to the product was not monetized. Customers could access it for free. And it was
Okay.
meant to generally keep them safe and help them to protect themselves during conditions that they could not control. So a huge social aspect to that. And I think we need to also look at that aspect, outside of monetization. How can we do a service for our community? How can we make sure that we're supporting communities at a deeper and more intrinsic level where they actually will be willing to give you their data and you can make sense of it and return the favor by creating great products? And that was, it was a journey. It wasn't
Mhm.
something that happened overnight because there was a lot of training, a lot of historical data, unsupervised versus supervised learning that had to take place, a lot of testing and learning, glitches, and not forgetting um, what do they
Challenges?
say? Computational debt
Yes.
that went into the entire process. So yeah, there was a lot of work that happened on the back end for this to come to life. But to see the return of that, happy customers, and being able to measure that, more importantly, what were our scores last year versus this year, and do we see it increasing, decreasing? On actually being able to measure that with validity, so that no one can assume it, makes a huge difference.
An assumption is always a big challenge in any business when we're flying by the seat of our pants, as people might say, making decisions off the back of just fuzzy data or just information, hearsay, um, something like that. In that world, you're going to get a lot closer to a good outcome for a customer, or what the particular use case might have been at the end result for the particular users. And the cool thing about that is you've got a feedback loop where effectively you can
Yeah.
continue to get that feedback and see if is it really impacting. Are we getting cut through? Are we really helping at the end result? So that's one of the key advantages of that.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's the kind of mindsets we need to have is how can we innovate in a world that's highly competitive when it comes to revenue, highly
Yes.
competitive about reaching out to the customer. There has to be at least one thing differently that we can do to add value to the customer, because it's not just value to our revenue streams, but it's value to the customer, and really digging deep into that detail. So optimizing those processes and just understanding that user journey from a data perspective, and then understanding the impact on, I guess, employees of an organization and how you can make both lives easier, can give you a great story.
So it's been a pleasure. We could probably keep talking for hours, but
Yeah,
thank you for joining us, sharing a little bit about data as some points of focus where people can consider if they're looking at collecting big data or where they might start and analyze. Most people will jump straight into marketing and sales, but you open up some different opportunities for people to consider. Thank you for joining us on the DevReady Podcast today. I really appreciate your time. And we'll get you
thank
back
you.
at some point because there's plenty of probably specific conversations we can have on certain topics.
Sure.
We can dig in a little bit more or less general. So really appreciate your time.
Thank you. Really appreciate the opportunity. It was a great chat. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue.